Imagine this, you wake up one morning and surprise, you're married. Maybe to a grumpy, emotionally unavailable duke, maybe to a notorious rake who wants nothing to do with you, or maybe it's your best friend who you definitely don't have feelings for, yet. But either way, you're stuck, and the only way out is to catch feelings. So today we're talking about why the marriage of convenience trope never gets old and why it's perfect in historical romance. If you're looking for recommendations, I've got those for you too. So let's dive in. Welcome to Reading Under the Covers, a romance novel podcast where we chat, fangirl, and maybe even swoon over our latest reads. I'm Francesca from Under the Covers book blog, and today we are diving into one of the most timeless and dramatic tropes in historical romance, and that is the marriage of convenience trope. If you're not sure what a trope is, think of it like your favorite storytelling ingredient. Like, for example, enemies to lovers, fake dating, or today's topic, which is marriage of convenience. Tropes are the familiar themes and setups that make especially the romance genre, so addictive. And if you want to learn more about tropes, I've got a full breakdown on the blog that I will leave linked down below. Plus, if you sign up for our free Substack, you'll actually get a trope guide with a list of over 400 tropes that are going to help you find something that you're in the mood for across romance, thrillers, and fantasy, which will definitely help you find your next favorite read. Now, marriage of convenience is the trope that gives us kind of a forced proximity and undeniable tension vibe with some of the best slow burn romance out there, because when two people are legally bound before the first spark of attraction even ignites, then you know things are about to get deliciously complicated. But before we get into the romance of it all, let's talk a little bit about history, because marriages of convenience weren't just a fantasy created for romance novels. They were actually real, they were common, and in many ways they were necessary. For most of history, marriage wasn't all about love. It was about survival, social status, property, and alliances. Love, that was just kind of an optional bonus if it happened at all. There were many reasons why people entered into a marriage of convenience, maybe because of wealth and status. If you were nobility, marriage was about securing your family's fortune or rising in the ranks. This is where we get all of those dukes and heiresses pairing up for purely practical reasons. Of course, there were also political and alliance marriages with more of the royalty, kings, queens, and the aristocrats who rarely married for love. They were married to unite families, secure peace treaties, and gain land and power. Think of these more as arranged marriages, like between feuding clans or enemy nations forced into a truce, which is a completely different trope, and we'll get to that on another episode. But there were also protection marriages. For women, marriage was often about security. Without a husband, a woman had few legal rights. For example, she couldn't inherit, she couldn't own property, and sometimes she couldn't even live independently. So a marriage of convenience might have been the only way to secure her future. If a woman was widowed, she was often expected to remarry, especially if there were children or an estate involved. This is where you see a lot of those duty-bound second marriages that eventually turn into love. And lastly, we also had lavender marriages, one of the lesser talked about but very real forms of marriage of convenience, where they were basically an arrangement between a heterosexual person and someone who was queer, usually to protect reputations or maintain social standing. I think that's one of the most exciting reasons why marriage of conveniences are so good in historical romance and why this genre does them so well, because so many marriages actually started this way. Now that we've covered a little bit of the history, let me tell you why we eat this trope up every single time. First of all, it's usually a slow burn masterpiece. If you're into slow burn, you're going to love a marriage of convenience. You have two people that are thrown together, forced to navigate a relationship with zero romantic foundation, and the tension between them is everything. Then, of course, you have the forced proximity because they are immediately living together. They're sharing space, and sometimes even they have to share a bed. And that just means that every interaction between them is charged. Of course, then you also have that denial and angst, and there is usually that one moment that is the explosive catalyst for their relationship moving past where it started. So one of them catches feelings first, or maybe both of them do, but they refuse to admit it. And then there's that one moment, maybe it's an accidental touch or a shared glance, and that realization that this is no longer just about convenience and they actually have feelings for each other. And after that, you have the grand confession. So when a marriage of convenience romance finally reaches the breaking point and someone admits that they're in love, it just hits like no other. It is so satisfying. So this is why this trope is still one of the most satisfying in romance, because also there is no easy way out. They have to stay together, and that just means that we get that slow, beautiful transformation from strangers or even enemies at times to soulmates. Now, I think that there are some classic authors that nail this trope every single time. So if you love a good marriage of convenience, these are some authors that you need to absolutely have read. First, Lorraine Heath. She writes deeply emotional love stories where duty turns into passion. Elizabeth Hoyt, who writes steamy, unconventional historicals with strong heroines. Kathy Maxwell, who writes Regency romance gold, full of heart and heat. One of my favorites, Anne Stewart, who writes darker, angsty historicals where love sneaks up on you unexpectedly. Tessa Dare for witty, swoony, and full of banter historicals. And Vanessa Riley for some historically rich Regency romances. Today, I wanted to give you 5 must-read marriage of conveniences in historical romance that if you haven't read yet, you need to add to your TBR. There's a bit of a variety here, so you're going to go for some darker, more angsty ones and some historical rom-com light and fluffy ones. So let's start with those, shall we? So the first one is The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. This has a marriage of convenience. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, grumpy sunshine, forced proximity, and a slow burn. Imagine that you have this grumpy, brooding, scarred duke, and he is in need of a wife. Not because he wants one, but because he needs an heir. And then there's this bold, take no crap seamstress who just wants to be paid for a dress that she made, because honestly, your girl is struggling. So that's how Emma Gladstone ends up standing in front of the Duke of Ashbury in his study, wearing the actual wedding gown that she made for another woman who, by the way, ditched the Duke at the altar, and she is demanding payment for the dress. But instead of a few coins, what Ashbury proposes, because he is the king of emotional walls and self-loathing, he straight up proposes marriage on the spot. No love, no emotions, just a deal. So basically, they will marry. She will produce an heir, and then they will live separate lives. It sounds pretty simple, except that Emma is warm and funny, and she is completely unimpressed by his grumpy, self-isolating ways, and Ashbury, who genuinely believes that his scars make him unlovable, starts feeling things. So let me tell you, this man is so down bad before he even realizes it. It is the best thing that you'll read, and Tessa Dare gives us this hilarious banter, ridiculously fun chemistry, and a grumpy sunshine dynamic that will just ruin you. It is such a good book. It's got a touch her and die energy, one bed, and the softest kind of slow burn romance. It is an instant comfort read and a book that I think that you will definitely want to reread several times. So next we have The Marriage Contract by Kathy Maxwell. This is a marriage of convenience with a mysterious hero, Scottish laird, with forced proximity and a virgin heroine, as it's often the case in historical romance. So we've got a well-bred lady with no fortune to recommend her, and the only way to secure her future is to honor a marriage contract with a man that she has never met. It sounds pretty manageable, except that this man is Aidan Black. He is the exiled Earl of Theobald, that I'm probably totally mispronouncing, and he is a Scottish laird surrounded by all these dark rumors, lots of danger, and lots of brooding. So when our heroine Anne arrives at Kelwyn Castle, she's determined to fulfill the contract and make the marriage real, because honestly, she has no other choice. So now let's talk a little bit about Aidan. He is pure mystery, very handsome, he's masterful, but at the same time emotionally unavailable to the extreme. He's willing to share his bed, but not his heart. And Anne is not settling for halfway. It's got all the tension, all the longing, and a slow burn romance that is set against the backdrop of a wild Scottish castle. Aidan thinks that he can keep Anne at arm's length, but she's not about to let a smoldering, brooding laird with secrets get the best of her. If you love a strong-willed heroine who refuses to be ignored, Scottish heroes with tragic pasts, a marriage of convenience with a side of slow burn, and a castle full of secrets, loyalty, and reluctant romance that turns into so much more, then this one needs to be on your list. It has high stakes, high emotions, and a hero who is just going to wreck you before he finally gives in. Sign me up for all of that. And speaking of Scottish lairds, we do have an episode coming this week where I'm going to be talking all about Highlanders in historical romance, and I'm going to do a Highlander hero showdown. It's going to be lots of fun, so make sure that you tune in for that. The next is by a favorite author of mine, and it's When a Rogue Meets His Match by Elizabeth Hoyt. This is a marriage of convenience, enemies to lovers. It's got a dangerous hero, some forced proximity, and power struggles. Our heroine is fiercely independent with a sharp tongue and zero tolerance for nonsense, and suddenly her uncle, who is the absolute worst kind of manipulative, powerful aristocrat, decides that she needs to marry his fixer. Our heroine, Messalina, is witty, vivacious, and she has her pick of suitors, but instead of a love match, she's being forced into a marriage with a man who does her uncle's dirty work. That is, our hero Gideon Hawthorne, a man that she neither trusts nor respects. And Gideon, he is lethal, ambitious, and he's used to being feared. But this is where things get interesting. Gideon actually wants this marriage. And not because he's smitten yet, but because this is his way out. He has spent a decade clawing his way up from the gutter, doing whatever it takes to survive. And now he's ready to step out from under the Duke of Windermere's thumb. And his final task is to marry Messalina. If he does, he gets to be his own man. She's not having it at all. She refuses to be a pawn in their power game, and she's definitely not falling for a man who has built his career on deception, intimidation, and very likely murder. So she makes a plan. She's going to play along, she's going to wait for the right moment, and she's going to escape. Except Gideon isn't what she was expecting at all, because let me tell you, when a dangerous man like Gideon decides that he's going to protect you instead of destroy you, things are going to get messy really fast, because he's her enemy, but he's also protecting her. He's ruthless, but he's offering her freedom. And when they finally decide to give in to their chemistry, it's just scorching. So this book is for you if you love a bit of a forced marriage that turns real very fast, a broody, morally gray hero who would burn the world down for his wife, lots of power struggles and sharp banter, a heroine who refuses to be controlled, and a hero who loves her for it. So bottom line, this is one of Elizabeth Hoyt's best, and it gives us all of the dark, angsty, high-stakes romance. Absolutely love this one. I definitely think you need this one in your life. The next one is Ravishing the Heiress by Sherry Thomas. This one has marriage of convenience, unrequited love, slow burn. It's an angsty and emotional one, and it also has the friends to lovers trope. So basically what happens here is that our heroine is marrying the love of her life, but she does that knowing that he doesn't love her back. And she knows that from the moment she says, I do, because he is waiting and counting the years until he can leave her for someone else. So our heroine Millie is young, wealthy, and very practical. So when her parents arrange for her to marry the newly titled and deeply in debt Fitz, she accepts. It's just a business transaction and nothing more. He gets her money to save his family, and she gets to be a countess. And because she's only 16 at the time, they agree. There's going to be no touching, no love, and just 8 years of friendship. And then at that point, there's going to be an heir, and they will go live their separate lives. So on paper, this should work. Fitz is actually charming, easygoing, completely honorable, and also he's utterly in love with someone else. He has a childhood sweetheart, a woman that he would have married if not for the fact that he was broke and he needed Millie's money because that was his family's last hope. So Millie actually plays the perfect wife. She's supportive, composed, she's a friend above all else, and never once does she let him see that somewhere along the way she fell in love with him. And for his part, Fitz actually adores her, not romantically, but in a deep way. She's his best friend, his confidant, the person that he trusts most in the world. But as that 8-year mark is approaching, his first love, Isabella, returns. She is now a widow, newly available, and she's ready to be with him at last. So suddenly everything that Millie has built is about to shatter. So what's going to happen now? Because she spent a decade pretending that she doesn't love her husband and he's about to leave. She's also played the dutiful friend for years, and suddenly maybe he's looking at her a little bit different. In the moment that he finally says, I want you, it's also the moment that he's about to leave her. The slow burn in this one is painful in the best way possible. Fitz takes so long to realize that just maybe real love was actually unfolding in front of his eyes, and not with the woman from his past, but with the wife who has been there by his side every step of the way. This one is great if you love a devastatingly angsty, longing, and full of slow burn tension romance. If you want a marriage of convenience where one person is actually secretly secretly in love, and some deep, painful pining with the most satisfying emotional payoff. This book will just break you in the best way. It's so romantic, it's beautifully written, and it's an absolute must read for fans of really emotional historical romance. And then the last book that I have for you guys here today is You're the Problem, It's You by Emma R. Alban. So this one has a lavender marriage, enemies to lovers, queer historical romance. It's got forced proximity, some mutual pining, and political intrigue. So this is not quite the traditional marriage of convenience, but trust me, there's going to be a marriage of convenience at the end, and I did want to include a lavender marriage in here as well. So we have two aristocratic men in Victorian England who are forced into each other's orbit over and over again, and they are trying very hard not to strangle each other because they don't necessarily like each other very much, but also maybe they're trying to avoid to kiss each other senseless. That's basically Bobby and James. They are on paper two complete opposites. So Bobby is loud, brash, ambitious. He's tired of being overlooked as the spare by his family, and he wants to do something that matters. Also, watching nobility waste their powers makes him feral. And then you have James. He is quiet, controlled. He is resigned to keep his head down because surviving his stepfather's household has taught him that expecting anything only leads to disappointment. So deep down, he wants, but he just doesn't believe that he can have. Bobby, on the other hand, is infuriatingly alive. He is too much. He is too everything. And unfortunately, that's the exact person that James crushed on in secret back at Oxford. So what do we have now? We have some meddling cousins who refuse to let them avoid each other any longer. Beth and Gwen, who orchestrate every coincidental run-in possible. There's social outings, family gatherings, and probably a few not so accidental oops that leave them alone in a carriage for a few moments. But Bobby and James spend every one of those encounters glaring at each other while trying not to notice how unfairly attractive the other one is. But then, because obviously things have to get even more complicated, someone starts to blackmail their families and threatening to expose their secrets that could just ruin everything for them. So suddenly these two men who can't have one civil conversation with each other have to work together. And you know what's going to happen next. There's some enemies to lovers action, some forced proximity, lots of unresolved tension and snapping at each other at the worst possible moment, plus all the lingering stares and the heated arguments and the mutual pining until they get to the part where maybe I don't hate you anymore. The best part of it all is I think this one has a great lavender marriage done right in a time where being openly queer is not an option. This story gives us a romance that feels deeply historical, but also deeply hopeful, because what starts as impossible for them slowly becomes unavoidable. So I think if you love queer historical romances and plenty of banter in an enemies to lovers romance with soft moments also with lots of tension and a bit of matchmaking shenanigans, then I think you're going to really enjoy this one as your next read. So that's all I have for you guys today with our marriages of convenience in historical romance. I would love to hear from you guys. What are your favorite marriages of convenience and historical romance? So drop your recommendations in the comments. And if you've read any of the books that I talked about here, also let me know what you thought of them. As always, you can find even more recommendations on the blog at underthecoversbookblog.com. So be sure you check that out. And also don't forget to subscribe to our free Substack so that you don't miss any of the content that we post across all of our platforms. If you're tuning in on YouTube, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell notification so you don't miss any new videos that we post. If you want to find us on social, all of those links are going to be in the description box down below as well. And for now, that's all I have for you guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!